We are going to talk today about what's in this box and who actually made what's in this box. If I lift it up, you see the name. It's my new telescope and everything about it right after the trailer. Hey, this is View into Space. I'm Sascha from Switzerland, so grüezi miteinander and thanks for watching my channel. So let me tell you first what this video is about and what it isn't about. In this video I will cover the manufacturer of this telescope, which is Celestron, and we will have an in-depth look into their SCTs, their Schmidt-Cassegrain telescopes. We will also unbox this C9.25 Edge OTA telescope. So that's what you can expect. What we will do in another video is I will show you everything that you need to configure such a telescope that it fits for astrophotography. And probably even in another video we will then look at how it performs under the stars. And one last thing before we can start is a disclaimer. Whatever I present to you in this video about Celestron is my personal opinion, given of the intransparency that is actually around this company. This is all to my best knowledge, to what I could actually find on the web, but things might actually be wrong. And with that, let's get started. So first of all, the history. I started my astrophotography career with a CPC 800, so with a Celestron telescope. And a few days ago I sold it again to a father with a young boy, and I hope he will have as much fun as I had with it. For me, the CPC 800 was not accurate enough, and so I went now with a dedicated OTA, which I could put on my AM5 mount. So that's a little bit why I did the switch. And that's what I want to start with, Celestron. Because while the name is so popular and everybody knows it, even people who are not active in astronomy at all, if you ask people about Celestron, they know almost nothing about it. For example, if I ask you, what nation is the home of Celestron? You might struggle. Or you might even just give a wrong answer. You might assume, for example, it's a US company. It's not really. So, but let's start with the history. That's also the fascinating part. There was actually a guy called Tom Johnson, and in 1955, so 70 years ago, he founded Valor Electronics. Only 5 years later, so 1960, he created a dedicated department for astro-optical goods within Valor Electronics. And another 4 years later, so 1964, so about 60 years ago, he invented the Schmidt-Cassegrain telescope, and he renamed the company to Celestron Pacific. So Celestron, as we know it, it's about 60 years old. And quite honestly, given the popularity that Schmidt-Cassegrain telescopes have today, they really deserve kudos for that. Because when I think about reflector telescopes, there is really no other type of reflector telescope I would favor besides the Schmidt-Cassegrains. Mostly because they're either too large or have to be constantly collimated and other things. And given all of that, Celestron had a huge success globally and especially in the US. And in the last years, Celestron covered 70% of all consumer telescope sales in the US, followed by Meade with 15%, Skywatcher by 10%, and all the rest, William Optics, Ascar, Omegon, Takahashi, and so on, they shared 5%. Now, from my point of view, this is probably thanks to the huge assortment of entry-level telescope that Celestron offers, and they're almost the only ones. So if a child asks for a telescope for Christmas and the parents are not really well informed, they just go to a supermarket, what they usually come out with is a Celestron telescope. And then the other part is the Schmidt-Cassegrains, and we come to that. But already here, figuring out which percentage of the sales go for these entry-level telescopes and which goes for like SCT OTAs, it's not possible. Celestron does not publish its sales, its results. We have no clue. So you might ask, where does this intransparency come from? First of all, Celestron is not publicly traded. It's a private company. And here we also come which nationality Celestron has. So Celestron is owned by the SW Technology Corporation. And SW obviously stands for Sascha Wyss. So now you know who owns it. Kidding beside, it's a Delaware-based company. So in this case, Celestron is a US company. Not really, because SW Technology Corporation is again a subsidiary of Cinta Technology Corporation, and Cinta is located in Taiwan. And so if you go the whole chain up, Celestron is a Taiwanese company. But also Cinta, by the way, is privately owned. So also from Cinta you will not get any yearly results or anything which would really show anything about the sales from Celestron. So is that bad? Absolutely not. That's just a fact, and it's just an explainer why there is a certain intransparency. The real problem is a situation which Celestron has only to a certain part responsibility, and that's their quasi-monopoly. We know that one of the basics is that a monopoly is something that should be by all costs omitted, and every government goes to great length to prevent monopolies to be created. So for example, when Celestron wanted to buy Meade, based on that this would have resulted in a quasi-monopoly, it was not allowed by the authorities. But we all know what happened to Meade. They got broke, they do not exist anymore. And with that, the 15% or most of the 15% of the US market share that they hold went now over to Celestron, which gives me an estimate that Celestron might now control about 85% of US telescope sales. And in the area of the Schmidt-Cassegrains, they have now a quasi-monopoly. There is nobody else who offers anything comparable to the Celestron Schmidt-Cassegrains. Now, given that the Schmidt-Cassegrains from Celestron are in a perfect quality or a very good quality, and they have proven themselves over a very long time, this itself is again not an issue. It would be nice having the choice to choose where to buy from, but it's just a fact that we cannot. The bad taste that the whole thing has is that Celestron has in the past significant legal challenges which alleged price fixing and market manipulation, which resulted in higher prices than justified for the customer, for us. And that's also the big danger, obviously, of any monopoly, that they actually exploit their situation, as they can practically ask whatever price they want. And again, I'm not alleging that Celestron is doing that or will that in the future, but it's definitely a risk which has to be observed. And interestingly, it's not only about the price, which they now can practically freely choose, but it's also about the delivery times. When I was in the process of buying this one, I also looked into the C11. And so Optics, where I bought it, they told me that I would have to wait 6 months for a C11. This one, they had one on stock, so I acted fast. I don't know how long I would have to wait for it if they would not have had it on stock. So the bottom line is that Celestron does not really have to care about their pricing policy or about delivering on time. They know that every astrophotographer and everyone invested in astronomy who wants to shoot planets or observe planets will practically have to buy their products. And I think for the moment, we as consumers, we simply have to accept this as it is, because there is really no other alternative. So I know I feel now like out of block. I could have just unboxed this, but I had to give you my 20 minutes of background story. But I found it interesting because everybody knows Celestron. To know a little bit the background and also the market dynamics here, it just helps you a little bit understand the background of this product. So as a next thing, I would just like to talk a little bit about Schmidt-Cassegrains in the context of astrophotography. So as stated, you kind of need them if you want to go to a higher focal length than about 1000 millimeters. Anything above that is refractor-wise either too expensive or too impractical, as the scopes get really long and really heavy. From that point, you have to look at reflectors. And when we're talking about reflectors, you could obviously choose a Newtonian. Good luck. I find some of the videos on YouTube quite amusing, where people try to tame Newtonians to be good astrophotography scopes. I personally would have neither the time nor the patience for that. So given the complexity anyhow of these devices, the Schmidt-Cassegrains are just the best solution at the moment available. Now obviously they exist in a lot of sizes, 6-inch, 8-inch, 9¼ inch, 11-inch, 14-inch. And I think it is crucial to find the right compromise. First of all, the higher the focal length, the better the guiding has to be. And on the other side, the heavier they are, which means the better mounts you need to get to this decent guiding. So be aware that even if you could afford a rather large SCT, you might not be able to afford the fitting mount. And if the guiding is crap, your pictures will be crap. And then there's something else. You have the regular SCTs, and in the case of Celestron, so in principle the only case, you have the Edge HD versions, which are substantially more expensive. So which ones should you choose? There is no reason that the regular ones would not work for astrophotography. You can do wonderful pictures with them. There are some issues. One is that, and that's how they propagate the Edge HD, that on the outside the stars are distorted. So you practically should only use the inner circle then for doing photos. So for example, if you shoot with a 585, your sensor is so small that this is not relevant at all. But if you shoot now, for example, with a 2600, it is kind of crucial that your picture is flat. The other big difference is that with the Edge HD version, you can lock your mirror, because the focusing happens actually by moving the mirror. Now this has two issues. On one side, when you actually slew around, the mirror might move and hence you lose focus. When you lock your mirror at the focal position, this is not happening. The other problem is that, at least with my CPC 800, when I try to do an autofocus, the mirror does not always end up at the same position. And so When it goes forward, the autofocus might actually detect something. When it goes backward at the same place, you have a different finding. It confuses the autofocus and you get nowhere. And at least in my CPC 800, autofocus with the EAF was not really possible. I hear others are more lucky. I think it really depends on the model that you have, how lucky you are. But there are better ways to focus, but for that you have to be able to lock your mirror, and that you can only do with the Edge HD version. And we will look at that, an alternative way how to focus, in the next video about this telescope. So that all considered, I was on the brink of choosing either the regular 11-inch or the Edge HD version of the 9.25-inch. And so at the end, I choose the better quality of the picture and of the guiding, because it's not so heavy, over the higher focal length. But after so much talking, let's now take a knife, let's open it, and let's see what's inside. So I guess beside the Taiwanese, there must also be something Russian about this company, because we have in the box a smaller box, and let's see if in the smaller box there's an even smaller box. So at least there's some cardboard. And so yes, there are some smaller boxes. Let's start with these ones. Here we have one, and that's a 2-inch mirror diagonal. And so quite honestly, I will not even open that up further, because I have already one, and so I probably will sell it just like it is. Have a look at the used Astro market, and you will be amazed how many 2-inch diagonals are for sale there. And that's exactly the reason. And by the way, that's also, you know, the fun part, that if you buy now a William Optics or ASCAR telescope, they would never get to the idea that I put anything, you know, for visual astronomy in there. But with Celestron, even probably, this is specially made for astrophotography, Edge HD scope. But they still put all the stuff in there for visual observation. On one side, that's nice. On the other side, if I could choose and pay a little bit less and don't have this stuff, I would also be quite happy. Then there's here a 50mm finder scope, which is something else I passionately hate, because I had one on my CPC 800. And quite honestly, there's nothing worse for really finding a star than these kind of finder scopes. So what I did on my CPC 800, I put a tail rad on it, and it was 1,000,000 times better than these things. You might wonder, what's the issue? The real issue is especially with these go-to scopes where you do sky alignment, so you don't do plate solving. You might actually identify a star which you want to use to align with, and visually you see very clearly where the star is. So you slew to it, and then you look through these finder scopes, and suddenly you have 10 stars in the area which look all exactly the same bright, and you wonder now which one was actually this star that you saw so clearly visibly, because given it enlarges it, the picture looks differently, and stars which were not so bright from the visible eye suddenly look almost or the same bright as the one you identified. And that doesn't happen with a Telrad, where you actually keep consistent the image that you see with your own eye. So I prefer the Telrads a lot over these things. So with that, we can take here the protection away, and now we can actually move the SCT out. Now, before we come here to the thing in the center stage, I found some other goodies in the pack. That is actually the holder for the search scope. Now that here is interesting. For my fellow astrophotographers, this is something you might have heard of from tales from your father or grandfather. It's called an eyepiece. really something special where you actually look with your own eye through a telescope, not a camera. I know if... Don't be mad with me. So this is actually, even I have to say, this is kind of cool because it's massive. I mean, wow. I never owned, I mean, I practically don't own eyepieces, but I've never even, I think, seen such a big one. It's just huge. It's 23 millimeters, 2-inch. So I kind of look forward looking through that. I have to admit, there must be quite an experience. So yeah, I will keep that. Because it doesn't happen often that I use my telescopes visually, but I can imagine that with something like this, it must be quite an experience. So I will tell you once I've looked through it. But yeah, cool. And with that, let's come to the thing in the center stage here, the SCT. So let's take it out of the plastic bag. So obviously they have the obligatory warning in there that you should not look directly at the sun with it. But honestly, I don't know what would break first, your eye or the mirror in here. Probably both about simultaneously. Anyway, definitely not a good idea. Agree? So let's look now together at the feature of the Edge HD SCT. So I stated this is the 9.25 version. It's still, from a weight point of view, quite easy to handle. It doesn't feel overly heavy. It has here installed the 1.25 inch connection for eyepieces, and you can obviously remove that and then add the T2 connector, which then goes to your camera, or add a 2-inch connection which goes then to the 2-inch diagonal or eyepiece. Then we have here the focusing knob, goes real easy, really smooth. And these are the two knobs where you can lock the mirror. So the idea is that you focus, and when you are in focus, then you lock the mirror so that during the slewing, during your photo shoot, it doesn't move anymore. And the other way you can actually use it is, and we will look at that in the next video, that you actually add a separate focuser to the back. Then you focus approximately with the mirror. You lock the mirror, and from that moment on, only the feather touch focuser in the back is actually focusing, which has the advantage that you can focus as with a refractor without having this problem that the mirror has some play and you never get to a real autofocus. And that's something that's really exclusive to the Edge HD, and one of the real reasons why you should opt for that. The other thing which is also specific to the Edge HD are the vent entries here, so that the warm air can actually move out of the SCT when you move it outside. The regular one does not have that. And there's also some mesh inside that the dust cannot move inside, but the hot air can go out. Then obviously we have down here the dovetail so that you can fix it to the mount. And if you want to have a look now how it looks like from the front, we can move that away. And here you see now the mirror in all its glory. So now this is the scope, but as always with astrophotography, there's this ton of stuff which you still need until you can make good photos. With that one, what camera options you have, what accessories you should buy when you buy an SCT, and what else to look out for, all of that we will cover in my next video about it. As soon as I have everything gathered, everything installed, I will show that to you, and then we proceed outside. Until then, clear skies.